ABC Victoria statewide drive. Well, if you weren't around in 1987, you won't remember the brutal and bizarre cult known as the Family, which was blown wide open when police raided properties controlled by Australia's most notorious cult leader, Anne Hamilton-Byrne. Dozens of children were recruited into this cult in an adoption scam. They were abused. Some were administered LSD. They were forced to wear identical clothing and have their hair dyed white blonde. They were told that she was a living god, as she maintained a cruel and tyrannical control over her followers. Ben Shenton was one of the children who was removed from her grasp when police raided the property. He now lives in Ballarat. Ben, thank you for coming into the studio.
It's a pleasure.
What was your reaction today to those reports that Anne Hamilton-Byrne is close to death?
She's been on a track that I guess in 2009 the last interview was done with her, and she was probably capable of conversation then. When I saw her a couple of years ago with my mother, she was suffering from dementia, so it's just a path that all old people go down. So she'll expire when she expires.
You went back to see her several years ago to try and get some sort of understanding about why she did what she did?
No, I'd already come to terms with that. To process anything you've gone through, you have to find out what went on, realise your own part in that, and understand the people involved.
So what was the point of your going back to talk to her?
Not so much talk to her, I knew she had dementia. It was more seeing a final, this is who you are. It's not a case of she's powerless. She'd already lost her power over me when I got removed from the cult, and that was a process of me moving on from that. That's speaking about it is speaking about another person for me. I've moved on so far from it, but at the same time it closes, I guess it's like closing a door on an event, on a chapter, seeing someone for where they're at. It was very interesting. She had no recognition of me. She knew my mother, but her mind's completely gone. So, yeah, it closed a door.
And it had that effect, that you were able to close that door when you saw her?
Yeah, it's almost like the click to the door being shut. The door had already been shut, but it was the final click. Okay, I've seen you as a very old person now. This is who you are. You're not going to be able to say anything more. The last conversation I'd had with her, which was intelligible, that happened years before that. There was no more to be said anyway. It was just interesting seeing her as she'll be from here on in.
And how was that different to her at the height of her powers when she had control over you?
Vastly different. Vastly different. You're dealing, as you said, when she wielded the power that she had, it was spiritual, it was physical. She had the ability to be able to control people in a room. That was very much, that's gone. The only control she really has over people is the power that they give her.
What do you recall from your time there, without going into distressing details for you?
Well, it covers an upbringing which would be similar to many people growing up in institution. There were someone who directed what had to happen. There were people that perpetrated that, and that involved fear, it involved abuse that was dunked in water, removal of food, beatings. Some of them were put outside at night and left outside at different times. So being part of that, helping that to happen, because you had feuds with those kids, you have to wear with all of that. So we grew up controlled and controlling one another. And that does something to you, and you're wired to do that. And so it takes time just to process what you did and then to move on past it. So yes, it was traumatic, yes, it was difficult, but you move on past. And 2 of the kids suffered from psychosomatic dwarfism, which is a known condition talked about by one of the doctors that pulled us out, Dr. Ed Ogden, a police doctor, that once you remove someone from a distressing environment, the growth hormones start to happen again, and both of those shot up in height. So it tells you that it was a traumatic upbringing, that you just survive. And my way of surviving was aligning myself with authority, doing what they said to do, and trying to control others to make sure they didn't break the rules. That you don't form friends doing that. It was a fairly lonely existence. But you move on, you understand what you've done and process life.
Wow. How has this made you as an adult? And I know that I know that you're processing it rationally now, but those sorts of things, when they're hardwired into you as a kid, can sometimes come back to bite you.
They do.
You know, and they're not, they're involuntary responses.
Yep. And that's the whole process of how the brain's shaped, is that we go through experiences 12 to 15, 16, where the growth hormones create all those neural paths, and neural experiences lay down a bedrock that you're talking about, how they react. One thing, the brain, it's plastic, it can change.
Yeah.
And so as you go through events, realise that those are automatic trigger responses, and then by choice choose to behave otherwise. As you do that often enough, you relay those automatic responses. So for me it was recognition, but also, you know, you've pulled my name out of a website that's a church website. I pastor a church now, and so a lot of that, my initial experiences at 17 was around Jesus Christ, who was the last person I wanted to know, considering the leader of this cult claimed to be him. But a personal meeting face-to-face in prayer with him in a Baptist youth pastor's office when I was 17 was the beginning process of God seeing me, God not intending it to happen, God intervening, and then drawing me into a relationship with him where I was able to take these events to him, receive genuine healing, able to forgive those who hurt me as I'd been forgiven, and that had a profound impact on helping to do the rewiring majorly.
How did you end up in this cult called a family?
Okay, so my mother had grown up in Jewish society in Melbourne. You track my grandfather, he was a member of this synagogue in St Kilda, the St Kilda Synagogue. Mother as well, very wonderful people. My mother grew up with parents in an idyllic relationship, married a guy who had come through World War II, had his own issues, not an evil guy, just had his own issues. And so by the time she'd had 3 children, suffered with, you know, a difficult marriage, what she perceived to be a difficult marriage, with a guy who probably suffered from depression and all the post-traumatic issues that we now know about that then no one ever knew about. She has psychosomatic illnesses, which you can track that when you go through events. It releases hormones into your body that begin to attack your immune system, and she was on death's door. So Anne got involved. My grandmother was, let me think carefully here, used to go along to hatha yoga classes in Tuak that Anne Hamilton took. She was known then, and so a connection was made. And my mother was looking for a way out, and Anne provided that.
And Anne presented herself as a saviour.
And in fact, my mother claims healed her. She was on death's door, and I don't deny that. I've seen spiritual power at work. I've seen people supernaturally healed through faith in Jesus Christ. And
nonetheless, Anne Hamilton-Byrne took you as a child.
So she told my mother, or my father was sent back to England. That left my mother as a single mother. She then Anne wanted my mother to look after her place in Upper Fenchurch Gully, a place called Wimber, which is one of the headquarters, but I couldn't be there with her, and so I was handed over. I was 18 months old.
The cult continues to this day, not in the same form that it used to operate, but it still continues to this day. Does that alarm you at any level?
You would call it a toothless tiger.
Yeah.
So while it has had its power, and indeed when we were pulled out, it was very destructive, what it was doing, it's no longer in the form it was. You have people that are on their way out, and so it will fade into existence. It'll become another, I guess, a footnote in society and history with lessons to be learned from it. Don't get me wrong.
Do you still have contact with some of those other children that you were brought up with, some of the children who you felt that you were required to work against in order to maintain your position of privilege with the authorities? Do you still maintain contact with them? Because they would be almost like brothers and sisters.
Precisely. And we do stay in contact. Some I get on see quite a bit of, or stay in contact quite a bit with, and others just due to they're in different states and different countries, you don't keep the same close contact. And others just I haven't spoken to for decades. Some of them are still closer to the cult than others and don't want to have contact with any of us. So there's an eclectic mix in there.
When Anne Hamilton-Byrne finally does pass, will you go and say your farewell? Yeah,
just like I did with Bill, her husband. I went along to the funeral.
Why?
You've grown up with these people as parents. whether they are or not. You've grown up with them believing their parents. Your earliest memories are it's mum and dad. Your Christmases, even though they were bizarre ones at times, though they're not, there's something about saying, you know what, goodbye. It's over, it's finished. My natural father passed away, I never knew him. Never knew him. He passed away in England. But the reality was Anne and Bill were, up until I was 15, my parents. So while they have no power over me, while they have nothing to do with me, there's just something in me that says, you know what, goodbye, done.
Thank you for telling me your story today, Ben. I really appreciate you coming in and shedding some light on this bizarre and mysterious cult that so many of us know about but really know nothing about.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Ben
Shenton, survivor from the family. He's now pastor at the Potter's House Christian Church in Ballarat.